Massachusetts is the second most productive state in the USA, behind only New York, which is of course helped significantly by being the home of a global finance centre that arguably has more to do with the global economy than any local operations. Massachusetts, though, got there on its own merit, and in isolation, it's truly one of the most impressive economies in the world. By GDP per capita, it would be the most productive country on the planet outside of Monaco, even beating out places like Norway and their mountains of oil revenues. And it got there by being smart. The economy's greatest natural resource is its people, and it has the highest average IQ of any state within the USA, which to be fair is very important just to spell out Massachusetts. Now, of course, people that give too much credence to IQ scores should probably be the last to draw attention to intelligence quotients, but in the case of Massachusetts, there is something more here, to the extent that it actually impacts their economic systems. The state is famously home to some of the most prestigious universities in the world, which for better or worse are major industries in and of themselves. On top of that though, the state has developed highly technical and world-leading companies that hinge almost entirely on technical knowledge. These economic achievements also crucially translate into real quality of life improvements for average people living in the state, and beyond income levels, the state often ranks top of the pack in lifestyle metrics as well. Considering that Massachusetts has achieved this without amazing natural resource endowments or even particularly favourable geographic conditions, it could be the model of a sustainable, extremely high income economy. But nowhere is without its problems, and to get to the bottom of them, we need to as always answer a few important questions. So, how did Massachusetts become the smartest state in the USA? How did it leverage that to build out one of the most productive economies in the world? And finally, is this economic system replicable in other states or other national economies? Once we have done all of that, we can put Massachusetts on the Economics Explained leaderboard to see how it stacks up against other US states and entire national economies. The USA is the largest and most influential economy to have ever existed in human history, but the question is, why? It's not the largest, most populous, or most resource-rich country in the world. It's still relatively young compared to a lot of other advanced economies that have had centuries-long head starts, and yet it is today the de facto global hegemon. We have a really exciting announcement. Over the past 2 years, we've been quietly working on a documentary in partnership with CuriosityStream that attempted to make sense of this paradox. We spoke to world-class economists, historians, and business people to get to the bottom of this success and also address if this is really for the greater good of the world or even the American people. It was a massive project that the entire team is incredibly proud of, and you can watch it now over on CuriosityStream. The origin of the USA as the country we know today is where settlers on the Mayflower landed in America, and perhaps the craziest part about the Massachusetts origin story is its accidental existence. A separatist sect of Puritans, later known as the Pilgrims, planned on settling in the mouth of the Hudson River, but weather conditions forced them to make do with the objectively inferior operating base known as Cape Cod, eventually becoming the Plymouth Colony. It's where the US Thanksgiving tradition comes from, even though the official holiday wasn't fully recognised until 1863. A number of colonies tried to replicate the Plymouth model along the coast, but none of them really prospered. As more continued to flood into the territory, colonial leaders founded Boston, named after a city that the new English aristocracy had once called home. This part is important because Boston was the place where the early settlers of what would be known as the state of Massachusetts made the decision to encourage higher education, creating New College in 1636 for incoming clergy members, which would later be known as Harvard, the oldest institution for higher education in the United States. After achieving statehood in 1778, Massachusetts rapidly industrialised and continued to lead in technological innovation well into the 19th century. By the time the Civil War had ended, the state had already begun to double down on initiatives that encouraged technological innovation and education. For example, they were one of the first states to introduce gas-powered automobiles, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, Boston College, Amherst, Smith, Clark, Northeastern, and Simmons were all established in just 40 years. The Great Depression dragged Massachusetts into a cycle where much of its manufacturing ceased, but that was actually a bit of a blessing in disguise. Post-World War II developments in the electronics and communications industry, accompanied by federal funding, finally proved that the state's focus on education was a priceless asset. The state is home to the aforementioned academic giants like MIT and Harvard, alongside dozens of other very well-regarded universities, which means there is a lot of money flowing into the state from students just looking for an education. Harvard alone, with approximately 7,000 undergraduate students, although this number tends to fluctuate, makes about $400 million in tuition exclusively. And this doesn't even include housing, groceries, and other basic necessities being paid with money coming primarily from out of state or even outside of the country. As for the university's expenses, including the number of students who can't pay in full, Harvard's endowment value hovers around $41.9 billion, which brings up another salient link in the Massachusetts chain of educational benefits: graduates. The state's world-leading institutions also attract very clever alumni and faculty who teach and often have very well-paid side gigs lending their expertise to high-end research firms from private industry and the government. In other words, handicaps in areas like agriculture and heavy industry actually ended up being a benefit in their case by redirecting the focus on education, encouraging brain gain, which is the flip side of the cautionary tales we've explored in a lot of recent videos. And as a result, the vacant textile mills and factories of yesteryear, once emptied by economic hardship, have transformed into research centres aided by large tech companies. Massachusetts is currently home to thousands of labs, R&D facilities, and advanced manufacturing centres because it's home to so many smart people, and smart people move there because that's where the jobs for smart people are, and so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. In fact, Massachusetts is one of the 10 states that performs between $15 and $36 billion per year in R&D, and it's a national leader in the realm of venture capital investments, standing toe-to-toe with global monoliths like Silicon Valley. One of the most newsworthy examples in recent years is a company like Boston Dynamics, an MIT spin-off founded in the early 90s. The company still has deep ties with the university and frequently collaborates with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, the R&D wing of the Department of Defense. What started as a glorified university research project has grown into a major institution in its own right, with the employee count reaching 7 times its original number in just 3 years following their merger with Google. As of June 2024, Boston Dynamics' annual revenue reached $75 million, particularly impressive since they aren't really even selling commercial products yet. Now, nobody can predict the future, least of all economists. But the potential applications of a generally capable humanoid robot are pretty clear, and this is the kind of long-shot, world-changing research that Massachusetts' unique blend of education, finance, and government institutions can facilitate. This extends beyond just regular technology into basically any field that hinges on the work of extremely well-educated individuals. Companies like MoMA, a biotech working on discovering the next generation of precision medicines, they recently announced the completion of a $150 million Series B financing round led by Goldman Sachs, a firm which itself has large operations in the state for access to talent and deal flow. Along with these businesses comes a reputation worth its weight in gold. They contribute to the great industries that are very sustainable. This is because unlike states and other countries that often rely on a few limited exports that involve digging stuff out of the dirt, technical innovation will never not be important. By cultivating an environment that welcomes many of the world's greatest minds, capital investment will continue to flow into the state, incentivised by competition amongst large corporations that hope to stay ahead of the curve. That innovation fuels the fear of missing out for both foreign and domestic investors. Now, of course, as is the case with most states and countries competing on the world stage, Massachusetts has its share of challenges, which is where those noble educational pursuits become a bit of a double-edged sword. With extremely desirable university educations and research projects, highly educated people from within and outside the state can move there to fill really good jobs. This can easily push out average people who don't have an Ivy League educations. Massachusetts, despite its relatively modest population, ranked 7th on the list of most moved from states last year. The study found that 57% of customer moves in the state were outbound. The most documented reason for why people are choosing to leave is perhaps unsurprisingly the spike in housing prices, reaching almost $700,000 on average between 2023 and 2024. The cost of living in Massachusetts is also 46% higher than the national average. The housing price shown is 108% higher than the national average, while utilities are 16% higher, and when it comes to basic necessities such as food and clothing, they're around 30% higher than the rest of the country. Prices are pressured by students who get their money from loans or from their parents to go and study in the state. Now, to be fair, there are other reasons for the Massachusetts exodus as well. 28% of surveyed respondents moved out because they found a job elsewhere, just over 19% left for family reasons, 18% said they were retiring elsewhere, and 16% departed due to lifestyle changes. Only 2% of those surveyed said they were moving out because of costs alone, but the key takeaway is that a lot of people are happy to look for opportunities in other states where those costs won't be such a burden. A job opportunity elsewhere is not nearly as compelling for people totally happy with where they live. It's also important to remember that tragically, the people most impacted by cost of living pressures are also those least able to afford an interstate move. Much of the exodus that makes up the lifestyle, family and retirement portion is also just made up of baby boomers seeking other places to settle down. Most aren't contributing to the state in terms of labour anymore, so it's not nearly as consequential as the cases regarding impoverished countries where engineers, doctors and skilled tradesmen are leaving in droves. From the perspective of a completely heartless economist, this reverse brain drain is also kind of helping the state's economic metrics. If everyday people move out or are forced out by well-paid Ivy League graduates working in these ultra-high-end industries, then it just further inflates the state's average metrics, even though this isn't necessarily what would be considered an optimal economic outcome, especially for those leaving their home state for the good of some GDP per capita metric. But looking at Massachusetts in a vacuum, is this economic system replicable in other states or other national economies? The short answer is yes. Moreover, some countries are already in the process of doing so. In terms of R&D, Israel has a reputation for heavy investments into technical innovation, and the government has introduced different programs over the last few decades to promote growth by co-investing alongside businesses into economically and strategically important industries. Of course, those industries come with their own geopolitical complications, but Israel is undeniably a global force in advanced technology. At the moment, it makes up over 5% of their GDP. In South Korea, the Presidential Advisory Council on Science and Technology approved a 4.6% increase in 2022 R&D spending, totaling roughly $20.7 billion. Emphasising the need for global technology leadership, the council planned to invest in nearly 1,200 additional projects. Then there's China, which has recently been in the headlines for its massive R&D spending on projects to curb its reputation for non-advanced manufacturing practices. Now, we've already explored these efforts in detail in our other videos, so we don't want to repeat too much here, but the point is, many countries around the world have noticed that technical hubs, like the one put in place in Massachusetts, attract activity from all over the planet, and that is a far more sustainable economic model than resource extraction and industries that rely on proper climate conditions. But an important thing to note is that these efforts take time, and they are by their very nature a risk. Not all investments pay off. Massachusetts undoubtedly has an institutional advantage. It's why people from all over the world continue to study abroad in places like Harvard and MIT. There are currently 3,478 international students enrolled in degree programs at MIT. Over a quarter of Harvard's 25,000+ students come in from overseas, and that number continues to rise with each passing year. Even the other colleges boast large percentage of graduates coming from thousands of miles away, and these aren't average people coming from who knows where. They're the best and brightest the world has to offer, and it doesn't hurt they're often injecting hundreds of thousands of dollars into the local economy for the privilege of contributing their expertise. Admissions can be as low as 4%, and this is after these universities finish sifting through tens of thousands of more than worthy applicants. So yes, countries can learn from Massachusetts' stance on education and R&D, but it will still require meticulous planning to reach the 2-century-old legacy the state stands on. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. Plenty have the money to build colleges and other think tank projects that have superficial allure. Also, it would be great if every state could build institutions where people just get to sit around and think all day. But the fact is, the world needs people that create concepts, as well as those who follow through and manufacture them, or dig up the materials necessary to build all of those new robots, or whatever else is found to be necessary or interesting. Massachusetts has done extremely well for itself, but if everyone was to follow their lead, even assuming they were successful, then the world would be full of clever ideas made by starving geniuses. Alright, now it's time to put Massachusetts, the smartest and second most productive state in the USA, on the Economics Explained leaderboard to see how it stacks up against other states and entire national economies. Starting as always with size, Massachusetts has a GDP of $759 billion, making it the 12th largest state in the USA. If it was its own national economy, it would be the 22nd largest in the world, just ahead of Belgium and just behind Taiwan. It gets a 7 out of 10. That impressive output figure is generated by a modest population of just under 7 million people, which means the state has a GDP per capita of $108,000. If Massachusetts was its own country, this would only be exceeded by Luxembourg, which only gets that figure through a technicality, and Monaco, which is just a small city-sized playground for the rich. So, to get a population this large, this productive, in such a sustainable way, is genuinely incredibly impressive. It gets a 10 out of 10. Stability and confidence is high. Like all states, it has the advantage of using the global reserve currency and having the support of the federal government to smooth out local problems. The state has also been conducting its business for almost 400 years at this point, and in that time it's built up an almost untouchable reputation, which attracts talent and investment the world over to further secure this reputation. It gets a 10 out of 10. Growth has also been quite strong. Over the last decade, the economy has grown by roughly 50%, which is in line with the national average. But it must be recognised that the USA as a whole has had extremely impressive growth itself by global standards, especially compared to other advanced economies in Europe and Asia. Massachusetts gets an 8 out of 10 here. Industry is clearly highly advanced and sustainable, as we've explored for most of this video. The state only loses a single point because it's still relatively dependent on being a component in a bigger economic system. It's an important and very well rewarded component, like the brain inside a body, but it still needs the USA around it to truly be able to specialise in what it does. So it gets a 9 out of 10. Even still, that gives Massachusetts an average score of 8.8 out of 10, putting it to equal first place on the state leaderboard alongside some other heavy hitters, and all the way up here on the national leaderboard. Now, if you want to learn why the second hardest to spell state in the USA is probably going to stay at the bottom of the leaderboard, we made an entire video on Mississippi and its economic challenges that you should be able to click to on your screen now. Thanks for watching, mate. Bye.